When it comes to slasher films and films that started the genre, people always think of Halloween, Friday the 13th, or even Nightmare on Elm Street. Even though they are classic films and staples of the genre, there is a film that precedes them, a 1974 slasher film. That film is Black Christmas. Black Christmas is one of the most intense films I've ever seen, and also a film that still holds up to this day, even with it being nearly 50 years old. The movie is the perfect example of less is more and the fear of not knowing. Throughout the film's runtime, you actually feel for the main characters as they are unknowingly trapped in the situation that they are in. Black Christmas went under many names. It was originally titled Silent Night Evil Night in the United States and then retitled Stranger in the House for television screenings. The screenplay was actually originally called Stop Me. The film was written by Roy Moore, who struggled to get the movie produced. The script was then passed to Bob Clark, and with a few alterations and rewrites, got the film produced and distributed by Warner Brothers in America. Bob Clark had a run of horror movies in the 70s, such as Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, Death Dream, Black Christmas, and was also the executive producer on Deranged, the last three movies all being released in 1974. But a lot of people may know some of his other films, such as Porky's, Porky's 2, Baby Geniuses, and also Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2. But what's really interesting about Bob Clark is that he also made the 1983 Christmas movie A Christmas Story. Bob Clark actually made two different Christmas movies that are completely opposite to each other. The film has a very strong cast. We have Olivia Hussey as Jess, who is our main and early version of a final girl/scream queen, the trope which is more known with Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween. Olivia Hussey is known for such films such as Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 film adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, which won her a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. She also appeared in films such as The Ice Cream Man, Psycho 4, and the TV movie version of Stephen King's It. Her performance as Jess is a highlight of the movie and is actually a joy to watch. We also have Keir Duella as Peter, who appeared in a 2001 A Space Odyssey and its sequel. The legendary John Saxon, who had more than 200 film and television projects during the span of 60 years to his name. Most people will know him as Nancy's dad in A Nightmare on Elm Street. And then there's Margot Kidder, who appeared alongside Robert Redford in The Great Waldo Pepper, but is probably mainly known for playing Lois Lane in the 1978 film Superman, the movie. The film took inspiration from the urban legend The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. The legend details about a babysitter who is watching television, only to start receiving phone calls from an unknown caller to check the children. After multiple calls, she calls the police, who then starts tracing the calls, only to be told to leave the house as the calls were coming from inside the home. We then find that children upstairs are dead, and the person on the phone was planning to kill her. This may sound familiar, as this urban legend was also the base for the 1979 movie When a Stranger Calls, a movie that I do plan to review in the future. The film did come with controversy, the most interesting being its television premiere. The film, under the title Stranger in the House, was set to premiere on Saturday night on the 28th of January 1978 on NBC's weekly Saturday Night at the Movies. However, 2 weeks prior to the premiere, the Chi Omega sorority house on the Florida State University campus was the scene of a double murder, in which two sisters of the Chi Omega were bludgeoned to death in their beds. The attacker then went to a nearby room and violently attacked two more sleeping students. Luckily, they survived. 2 days before the film was set to premiere, Florida's then Governor Ruben Askew asked NBC President Robert Mulholland to not show the movie as it was too similar to the murders at Chi Omega Sorority House. NBC instead gave several of its affiliates in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama the option to show an alternative film, that film being Savage, the Man of Bronze. It turns out that killer was none other than Ted Bundy. Now, before we start talking about the film, once again, this is your last chance to watch the movie, as we are now heading into spoiler territory, so please pause the video, watch the movie, and then come back. And with that final spoiler warning out the way, let's take a look at Black Christmas. Our film opens on the exterior of a sorority house with Silent Night playing in the background. The house itself, according to Olivia Hussey, was actually bigger than how it was filmed. She said that the way it was filmed made it seem more smaller and tighter and gave more of a claustrophobic feel, which I 100% agree with, especially later in the film in the phone call scenes. We can see that a Christmas party is being held by the sorority house. Suddenly an unseen man, who we later get to know as Billy, sneaks into the house by the way of the attic. And this right here is the true fear of this film. You never fully see the killer, and you don't even know why the reason he's there. It makes you nervous, as you want to know why. Could he be related to one of the girls? Is he just crazy? Bob Clark kept it vague, and it's done really well. When filming Billy going up the garden trellis, they put the camera on the cameraman's shoulder, which was attached to a contraption, hence why you can see both of the cameraman's hands being free. It's interesting to see it done, considering that Steadicams were invented just 1 year later. Jess then gets a phone call, and you come to find that Barbara is planning to go skiing for Christmas. As Barbara is on the phone, we have this beautiful panning shot to the attic, and we come to see how close Billy is to the girls. Again, the claustrophobic feel to this movie. We do overhear on the phone the issues between Barbara and her family. She doesn't seem to be happy talking to her mother, but Barbara also has a tough front and cocky attitude. We see this when she talks to Billy on the phone, and also later in the movie when she talks to Sergeant Nash. This could be seen as Barb putting on a front to save face, as she doesn't want to seem weak. She does also have an issue with alcohol, which does get mentioned in the movie. However, Bob Clark did not write or direct the movie to have the women appear weak. A strict rule that Clark had set for himself when it came to writing the female characters was to never objectify them sexually or give them nude scenes. He wanted the college girls to come off as real people and not disposable horror characters waiting to die, which they all do in this movie, even with their grim demises. We have mentions of alcoholism and also things such as pregnancy and abortion. They do go talk about serious topics in the film, and it does make the women seem more human. And if anything, it's the men in this film who come across as horrible and also general idiots, give or take a couple, such as John Saxon's character. Jess answers the phone and says that the Mona is calling. The sounds that you hear over the phone are disturbing. You hear laughter, moans, grunts, squeals, screams, obscene language. It sounds like there's more than one person there. And that's because there is. 3 voices were used for the voice of Billy. There was Bob Clark, Nick Mancuso, and an unnamed actress. When the phone scenes were actually filmed, Bob Clark was off set and would read a script with a more tame version than what we would actually hear in the movie, so the actors can react naturally, and then he would loop in what we would actually hear in post-production. It sounds sinister, and to be fair, with the extreme close-up shots of the girls as they listen in, it's really effective. Nearly 9 minutes in, and this film has set everything up. And this is another positive point. The pacing. The film does not feel like a chore to sit through. The film sets the scene, sets the story, and it's off to the races. Even the scenes that are not in the house don't slow the pacing down. So Bob takes the phone and starts provoking Billy. Billy then says,
"I'm going to kill you."
It is so cold, and you see on Barb's reaction that she was caught off guard. And as I hear it, Scream actually comes to mind. It could be seen that Ghostface modus operandi could be influenced by this movie. One of the young girls, named Claire, decides to leave and goes upstairs to her bedroom to pack. We then meet the house mother, Mrs. McHenry. Mrs. McHenry is essentially the comic relief in the film. It is amusing seeing her on screen as she seems to have bottles of alcohol everywhere in the house. In a way, I do feel that she's not really needed for the plot. However, she's a welcomed addition, and she does add to the body count. We then see that Claire is in her bedroom. We then find out that Billy is actually in the closet. The point of view shots do remind me of Peeping Tom. We do see a lot from the point of view of the killer, including parts of the kills. Claire gets suffocated and killed. The rest of the girls do not hear her being attacked. Billy then takes Claire upstairs into the attic. Now, throughout the film, we have shots of Claire sat in a rocking chair with a bag over her head. Lynn Griffin actually held her breath for those scenes. It is not a mannequin head. Each shot is about 60 seconds. The only time they were able to shoot longer was when the camera moves away. This way Lynn can actually breathe, and it's not that noticeable. Talk about commitment to the role. It is now the following morning and we see that Claire's father is waiting for her. Of course, Claire has not turned up. Claire's father ends up getting directions to the sorority house. We then see that Mrs. McHenry agrees to help Claire's dad look for her. We also see at this point where the comedy side of the movie shines, from the poster of the granny, the couple making love in a peace sign that Mrs. McHenry tries to cover, to Mrs. McHenry shouting at her cat. You find that in this film, the men generally have a more conservative view on things, especially Claire's father and Peter. Claire's father says,
"I didn't send my daughter here to be drinking and picking up boys."
When in reality, Claire comes across as more conservative than all the other girls. Throughout the film, there's always this little bit of pushback with certain men by the women, which to be fair works really well in this film. It shows that the women are strong-minded and willing to fight, and in a way this can be seen as a feminist film. We then get reminded of the horror as we're in the attic and the camera zooms out from Claire's dad and Mrs. McHenry getting into the car to Claire still in the rocking chair. The horror is always watching over, and the scariest thing is, if they just look up, they could probably see her. It makes the film unnerving. The thought that your child is missing when really, you just need to look up and you see her. She is that close. We then cut to Jess and Peter. Peter is Jess's boyfriend who is studying to become an orchestra pianist. Jess tells Peter that she's pregnant but wants to abort the baby. This plot point is very important as it's used later in the film with the phone calls from Billy, who actually overhears Peter and Jess arguing later in the film. It is also an important point as the Roe v. Wade decision in America was made in 1973, 1 year before this film was made. This also shows the conservative side of Peter. He tells Jess that she can't have an abortion, and later in the film says that they will get married. He is telling her how she will live her life, which is still an issue even in today's world. This also helps push the idea that Peter could be the killer throughout the film. It hints that he is. Of course, spoiler alert, we know he isn't. Jess then heads back home and receives another call from Billy. We start to get a bit more backstory about Billy, even if it's not a lot. We see that Billy is doing the voice of his mother and father. They're asking where did Billy put the baby? A baby named Agnes. As he's talking though, the music in the background is really pushing the tension.
What your mother and I must know is, where did you put the baby?
The music itself was done by composer Karl. Karl stated in an interview that he created the film's mysterious music by tying forks, combs, and knives onto the strings of the piano to warp the sound of the keys. Zitra also stated that he would distort the sound further by recording its sound onto an audio tape to make it sound slower. The music really adds to the movie. I think the score was done so well. This call scene is really important. As mentioned before, we are now starting to get a snippet of Billy's backstory, and to be fair, it's really all we get. Something happened with a baby called Agnes that his mother and father did not like. Do we know what it was? No. Do we know who Agnes really is? No. Is Agnes even real? We have no idea. But that is the brilliance of this movie. It makes you want to know, but the film essentially gives you a big F you and tells you nothing. And really, it makes the film even more haunting and interesting. I mean, it's not like they're going to ruin it 32 years later with a remake and completely lore dump the hell out of Billy's backstory. Right? We are now at the police station where they're trying to tell the police officers that Claire is missing. Bob is a highlight in this scene. We also meet Sergeant Nash, who is essentially the bumbling police officer. Nash is probably the worst cop to be in the situations he is in this movie, and you'll see later on. Bob essentially makes fun of Nash by providing the phone number to the house by saying that the area code starts with FA, for fellatio. A random bit of trivia, John Saxon thought it was pronounced differently.
Oh, I don't. What, fellatio or fellatio? It is.
Fellatio, I say.
Oh, right, yeah, it is.
Thank God I am still working on getting monetized, as I bet that probably would have got me demonetized. We also find out that a 13-year-old girl has gone missing. We then see that Jess and Claire's boyfriend storm into the police station demanding that they set up a search party for Claire. In a way, it could be seen that this depicts that when it comes to reporting crimes or missing persons, that women do not get heard or believed, but when Claire's boyfriend comes in, things get done. Which of course shouldn't be the case, as everyone should be listened to, especially by the police. Or Nash is just a complete idiot. It's probably both. We are back at the sorority house where Barb goes on a drunken tirade. I think this tirade is the perfect example of the vulnerable side of Barb coming out. The build-up of her mum not wanting to be with her at Christmas and Claire going missing. We see that she is holding guilt, as even though she says,
Just come right out and say it. You think that I drove her away. And if she's dead, you're gonna blame me.
I think no one thinks it's her fault. I think Barb thinks it's her fault due to the confrontation at the start of the movie. And this movie really gives a lot of layers to their characters, and I praise the writing and the directing on this. These are not your box standard paint by numbered murder victims in a slasher film. They have depth. We then find out that a search party has been organised for Claire. Everyone goes out searching for her except for Mrs. McHenry and Barb, who stay at home. At the search, we find that the search party is for both Claire and a 13-year-old girl. We do not know if the missing girl has anything to do with Billy, but then again, it does add to the mystery. We find that Mrs. McHenry is packing as she is spending Christmas with her sister. Claude, her cat, has now gone up into the attic. Cat meowing starts to come from the attic. When Mrs. McHenry heads up, she sees Claire's body, only to then be killed by Billy with a crane hook. What you will notice with the kills in Black Christmas is that you don't see loads of blood and guts. You end up with the less is more feel to them. The times that you do see the blood is after the kill, which is very effective in the film. This was also used in Halloween 4 years later. Jess heads home as Peter is coming by to discuss things with her. We then get another phone call. Again, Billy seems to be doing the voice of either his mother or father, again reflecting on the past. Jess then decides to call the police regarding the phone call to see if there's anything that can be done. As she is talking, we see that Peter is already in the house, again pushing the idea that he is the real killer. Bob Clark said that he wishes the build-up lasted a little longer to give the idea that Peter was the killer. Peter and Jess talk, and Peter says that he's going to leave the conservatory and says that she can leave college and they'll get married. Jess tells Peter that she will not drop all of her dreams and what she wants to do. She also tells Peter that she does not want to marry him. Peter says that Jess is being selfish and says that she's treating aborting the baby like having a wart removed. This again is overheard by Billy, but also pushes the narrative that Peter is the killer, especially when he says,
You're going to be very sorry.
I would say that they really do try and get the idea that it is Peter out there, but we know it's not. It is a shame that the red herring doesn't work. Lieutenant Fuller tells Nash that they need to investigate the phone calls due to the fact that Claire is missing and the young girl was murdered in the park. John Saxon's performance in this film is one of my favourites. He comes across as a take no BS type lieutenant, but also has a kind side. He also has a humorous side, especially when it comes to Nash. Lieutenant Fuller arrives with a telephone lineman to tap the house phone. This is so they can identify where the calls are coming from and trace the call. We find out that the system used to trace the call is actually mechanical, and therefore Jess will have to stay on the line for as long as possible so they can trace the call. It's these little details that I love about this film. We don't really need to know this, but the explanation and also the scenes of the lineman running around looking for the trace adds to the film. It gives a sense of urgency, as you want them to find where the call is coming from, but also you want them to hurry up so Jess can actually get off the phone. We also find out there's a police officer stationed outside to keep an eye on things. Suddenly we get a quick shot of Peter waiting outside watching the police leave, which again, unless Peter is running to a payphone somewhere to make the calls, there's no other way for him to be the killer. Jess's friend Phil decides to go to bed. We then see Jess is downstairs as Billy decides to sneak into Barb's room. We get this really nice looking shot of a glass unicorn horn in the foreground as the door opens to a shadowy figure, again clearly foreshadowing what is going to happen. Barb wakes up struggling to breathe, and you get a sort of fake out as you think she's being killed, when in reality she is asthmatic and needs her inhaler. Barb says that she had a nightmare that a stranger was in her room. Oh, if she only knew. We then see Christmas carolers at the door, and at this point I want to talk about the colour scheme. You get a lot of hard, bright reds in this movie, from the wreath on the door to even the curtains. This is clearly a form of inspiration to the Italian giallo films, which are known for their vivid colours, and you can also see it with the point of view of the killer being Billy, and also to the degree the voyeurism that Billy is doing, watching the girls before he kills them. As Jess is listening to the carol singers, Billy makes his move. He goes into Barb's room and proceeds to stab her with the unicorn multiple times. Before he stabs her, he says,
Dexter, you tell what we did.
this shows that he might have killed Agnes, but he also says don't tell anyone what we did. Again, we don't know what they did. As Billy stabs, we again get the bright red of the blood and the shots on Barb's hand hitting the ornaments. A very stylistic choice, which again goes into the idea of giallo. After the murder of Barb, the phone rings and you feel the dread and suspense as you know that Jess needs to answer, but you don't want her to. We again get moaning as we cut between Jess, the lineman, and Lieutenant Fuller as they all listen in to what's being said. And then Billy says,
Just like having a wart removed.
this hits like a freight train as the music stings right when the words are said, at which point it does beg the question. Surely Jess knows that the person was in the house due to her and Peter having a conversation. This can also make Jess think it is Peter. We then see that the camera is starting to slowly creep downstairs while Lieutenant Fuller is questioning Jess. Billy then goes and hides in the closet. As Phil and Jess talk about how it could be Peter, Peter then calls Jess crying down the phone and sounding like an emotional wreck. And to be honest, Peter does sound really convincing at this point. I do honestly think if they did manage to make it more believable that it was Peter, that could have changed people's minds. Lieutenant Fuller listens in and then questions Jess after Peter hangs up. In the background you see a shadow. Billy is on the move. Jess comes to realise that it can't be Peter due to him being with her when a phone call happened. There is also the issue that the calls are not long enough to get a trace, so Jess needs Billy to stay on the phone. As Phil is getting an aspirin for Jess, we see that a search party is outside. They are looking for the killer of the girl in the park. It is here when one of the men say a brilliant line.
You just keep your doors and windows locked and you'll be safe. You understand?
Thanks.
I absolutely love this line. The reason being that with them locking their doors and windows, it would not make them safe. They'll be trapping themselves in with Billy, and I love this. The idea that outside this house we have police and search parties with guns looking for a killer, when in reality, he's inside. As Phil is locking the doors and windows, she goes in and checks on Barb. As she goes in, the door slams behind her. Out of the main cast, this is the only death that is done off screen. We then receive the final phone call in the film. Billy is taunting Jess by calling her a fat pig and is screaming down the phone. However, this time, they can trace the call. You also find out that Billy was left alone with baby Agnes. Again, we can only assume that Billy killed her. We then get the big reveal that the calls are coming from inside the house. But for me, what shocked me even more, even though I had a feeling that this would happen, is that the police officer outside has been killed by Billy. I was expecting it, but when I first watched this film, it still got to me. And I remember shouting, "Oh no," when it was revealed. It really got to me. Nash then gets instructed by Lieutenant Fuller to call Jess and tell her to leave the house, of course. It's Nash, so he tells Jess to leave without asking any questions. Of course, Jess asks what's wrong, and then says that she'll get Phil and Bob. And what does Nash do? Starts fucking shouting, and then goes and tells her that the calls are coming from inside the house. The one thing that Nash didn't need to do, he did. Of course, Jess starts shouting for Phil and Bob and arms herself with a fire poker. She heads upstairs and we have the tension build up as Jess moves slowly, the camera following her upstairs. We then go to Jess's point of view as she gets closer and closer to Bob's bedroom. As Jess forces her way into the bedroom, we see Phil and Bob dead on the bed. We then see one of my favourite shots in the movie, Billy's eye looking through the crack in the door. A contact lens was actually used to make the eye look so big. It is so haunting, and it's the reason I'm using it for my thumbnail. The hunt is now on as Billy starts to chase Jess. We do not see Billy at all in the chase scenes, and we can also see why Olivia Hussey would be classed as an early scream queen. Jess locks herself in the basement. The tension at this point is through the roof as Billy is screaming and hitting the door but can't seem to force it open. The light from the crack in the door perfectly goes on Jess's eyes as she has a face of panic and fear. You are in the moment with Jess. You want her to live. The police are now on the way to the house when we then see Peter outside shouting for Jess. Jess is unsure what to do. She tries to hide from Peter. Suddenly Peter smashes the window and gets into the basement. Jess now believes that the killer is Peter, and to be fair, I actually can't blame her. We know that it's not, but who in their right mind smashes a window and slowly walks up going, "Jess? Jess, is that you?" If I was Jess, I would be getting ready to bash his skull in. The creepy vibes are absolutely through the roof at this point. It is very well acted by Keir Duella. He could easily play a serial killer with no issues. The police arrive at the house and we hear Jess scream. As the police break into the basement, they find Peter dead. Jess also looks dead but manages to open her eyes, barely conscious. We can see that Jess did indeed bash Peter to death with the fire poker. We then find Jess in bed where we see the police are trying to work out why Peter would kill. They also believe that Peter was the killer all along. They leave the house due to forensic teams coming in and we see that Claire's father has gone into shock. As they turn off the lights to let Jess sleep, the camera slowly pans away from the bedroom. We follow the camera back to the attic, where we hear Billy's voice as we see the attic latch move. As the camera slowly zooms out, we do not have any music, just the sound of the cold wind blowing. We then see the credits roll, and the phone begins to ring. This ending is absolutely amazing. When I saw this ending for the first time, I had literal chills. The fact that there is no music and the phone just keeps ringing. The fact that Billy is still alive, and the main thing, the fact that we do not know the fate of Jess. What a way to end a movie. And that is Black Christmas. You have to watch this film. I love this film. It has now become a mainstay in my Christmas viewing each year. I love how the film builds up tension and in the end gives you that punch to the gut as you don't know what's happened to Jess. The sound design is amazing and the acting overall is really good. I would say that there can be a plot hole with the idea that Billy is screaming down a phone upstairs when the house is quiet. Why can't Jess hear it? But it doesn't take me out the movie that much. The film is also popular among celebrities. Steve Martin, when working alongside Olivia Hussey on the film Roxanne, told her that Black Christmas was one of his all-time favourite movies and he's seen it around 27 times. There is also a rumour that Black Christmas was Elvis Presley's favourite horror film and it was a tradition in his house to watch it every Christmas. Further rumours say that the family kept the tradition alive and watched it in his memory. If the rumours are true, Elvis would have celebrated this tradition a maximum of only 2 times before his untimely death in August of 1977, less than 3 years after the film's initial release. I can't praise this film enough. The pacing, the cinematography, everything is on point. You want to root for the characters in this film. You'll have a mixture of laughter and scares. It takes you on a roller coaster ride, and the ending really makes you feel nervous and uncomfortable. I could imagine people in the 70s and 80s after seeing this being really scared to answer their phones. Apparently John Carpenter spoke to Bob Clark about a sequel to Black Christmas and what he would actually do. Bob said that if he would set it the following year around fall and have Billy escape and return back to the sorority house, he said he would have named the film Halloween. 4 years later, John Carpenter's Halloween was released. Now, Bob said that John did not steal the idea, but it's crazy that Bob essentially came up with the framework for the Halloween movie. There is also a fan film released in May of 2021 called It's Me, Billy, a Black Christmas fan film. I have not seen this yet, but I may actually review it in the future, so stay tuned. We did, however, receive a remake in 2006 and one in 2019. And next week, we'll be looking into the 2006 remake of Black Christmas, and I can't wait. But for now, go watch the original Black Christmas, and remember, if the phone rings and you hear moaning, just get out of the house. Thanks for watching. Hi everyone, thank you for watching my review of Black Christmas. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and make sure you turn on the notification bell. Follow me on all of my socials, the links are all down below, and tune in next week as we do look at the 2006 remake. I am so excited, as you can tell. It's going to be very, very fun. See you next time, guys.